thank you for using the QR code. We have 20-some questions already. And so to encourage you to use that, we're going to go 2 or 3 from here and 1 in the audience. So Philip is going to, where'd Philip go? Philip's going to kind of sort through the questions. A lot of the questions are related to one topic, or maybe a couple topics for multiple questions. So Philip's going to ask these, and then we've got a microphone in the audience where John is. And I see the clock back there. We're not going to go past. Just understand, we're trying not to go past 11:55, so we can get to lunch and get back here at 1. All right. So here we go, Philip.
All right, Fuzz. I believe this one's for you.
Okay.
What are your thoughts regarding theistic evolution, and is it merely a way to reconcile macroevolution with belief in God as creators of the universe, or does it have any merit for further study?
One of the big debates among evangelicals and conservative Christians today is really the mode that God used to create. Did he create through using evolution as a process, or did he create through a personal intervention? And when you look at Scripture, you see that God can create supernaturally. There's a word in Genesis 1 called bara that's used to describe God's creative activity, that means to originate something new, that implies God is creating supernaturally. There is also asa, yatsar, that are used in Genesis 1. Bana is also used in Genesis 2, that seems to imply God is intervening to create from pre-existing material, but fabricating something new. And then there's words like haya and dasha, which seem to have the implication that God is creating through process. And so God could create through a process. God could create through a direct personal intervention. When you look at the usage of the words bara, asa, yatsar, bana, they all are describing the creation of life. Not, when process is used, it's typically referring to natural phenomena, physical phenomena, not biological phenomena. So to me, I think that, plus when you look at Genesis 2, seeing Adam being made from the dust of the earth, seems to rule out to me God creating through an evolutionary process. So for biblical reasons, I'm skeptical that could be the mode of divine action. Scientifically, there is evidence that seems to support, an evolutionary history of life, but you could also interpret that same evidence through a creation model framework. So let me just give one example. When it comes to homologies, shared biological designs, many people will say, well, this is the most compelling reason to think that evolution is true. And the argument is that these shared designs were found in the common ancestor and were retained as different evolutionary lineages emerged. But you could also see those shared features as reflecting common design, not common descent. And there are key transitions in life's history where evolutionary theory breaks down. We talked about one of them this morning with regard to the origin of life, but there's several others that you can document where evolutionary biologists working in those areas are quick to point out that current evolutionary theory just simply doesn't work. So I think there are good scientific reasons to be skeptical of the grand claim that evolution can explain everything. I also think there are good biblical reasons to be skeptical of that idea. But in my experience, people typically that advance theistic evolution are doing it so in a sincere way. They are, Bible-believing Christians who love Jesus, who are trying to make sense out of very complex questions. I personally, even though we hold to an older perspective, we are skeptical of aspects of the evolutionary paradigm.
And Fuzz, isn't there a book called Two Views book? That's where Reasons to Believe, which holds to God's miraculous interventions in life, contrasts with Biologos, that takes a theistic evolutionary perspective. We did a Two Views book with them, and you can find that book on our website.
And then also there's a book that I was part of the author team called Thinking About Evolution that might be of use as well if you're interested in that question. And we engage the idea of theistic evolution in that book.
So here's another one. I think it's more or less for both of you. Is do the advances in medical treatments and diagnoses infringe upon God's design and plan for humans? And at what point does modern medicine play God?
I'm going to actually talk about that at 1 o'clock in my talk. So we'll address that. But just to build a little bit more suspense, there are emerging technologies, emerging biotechnologies that are raising this big question, should we be playing God? So I'll be talking about that in the context of using technology to modify human beings at 1, and then tomorrow I will be talking about the question, should we play God, which will be kind of a companion to my talk today. So
I think you asked the question.
If people can wait, we'll get to that.
See, he was creating the suspense for you. He asked it during that talk. So, all right, well, let's ask this one then. Why, with so much evidence for a cosmic agent or an intelligent creator, are there so many within your respective fields that refuse to acknowledge that existence?
Yeah, just to be clear, there are a lot that do. I mean, you can look at a survey of men and women in science that's held every few decades, and indicates that there's always been a high percentage of physicists and astronomers who do believe in God and an afterlife. So the idea that they're all atheists is a myth. There are atheists, and the atheists tend to be more vocal than the people who are theists. And I've engaged a lot of these atheists. You can watch some of the debates I've done on YouTube. But what I think I notice is that they value their autonomy. It's like they're okay with a God that creates everything. They're not okay with a God that is so personally involved, he's evaluating the life of every human being. And so the desire for personal autonomy, I want to be the boss of my own life. I don't want some God beyond telling me what I need to do, is what's causing them to engage in what you see in Romans chapter 1. Romans 1 says the creation reveals God clearly, including God's attributes, but people engage in self-imposed ignorance. They choose to ignore what they know to be true. And what they do is they transfer credit from the creator to the creation. Isn't it amazing what Mother Nature has done? I mean, you get phrases like that. But it's all really based on the fact of their desire for personal autonomy. I saw that personally, both at the University of Toronto and Caltech. Brilliant physicists, but they had that strong desire. I do not want this God to rule over my life.
If I could just add one point, that was an exceptional answer. In my experience as a biochemist, it's very hard-pressed to find anybody that would deny that biochemical systems are remarkable, that they are incredibly elegant, that they have the appearance of design. The debate is, how do you account for that design? And, the surveys that Hugh's referring to will oftentimes report, and it depends on the discipline, but ballpark, it's about 30% of scientists who will express belief in a personal God. So atheism isn't as widespread within science as you might think.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and take one from the crowd. If anybody has one, John's walking around right now, and he is waiting for you to raise your hands. And if not, we'll give you another minute or two. Another minute or two. All right, let's go. All right, here's one you guys have never heard before. How old is the Earth, and which view does the bias in science support the most, old or young?
Okay, the age of the Earth, 4.5662 billion years, plus or minus 0.0001 billion. It's known to very high precision because we're able to date the ancient materials of the Earth using uranium decay, thorium decay, and these uranium and thorium decays into lead. 100% of the lead we have in the universe is the result of the radiometric decay of heavier elements. And so we're actually able to get 6 independent measurements of these ancient samples, and they all give the same answer, 4.5662 billion years. Now, I think what you're leading to is there's a debate within the Christian community. Is the earth old or is it young? And where old earth and young earth creationists agree is that human beings are specially created. We're all descended from one man and one woman that God specially created, not billions of years ago, not millions of years ago, but thousands or tens of thousands of years ago. So we agree on what's really crucial. The difference is the age of the earth, and it really boils down to how do you interpret the days of creation? And like Fuzz, that's going to be my next talk this afternoon. I'm going to take you through Genesis 1 and basically show you how advancing science gives us a stronger and stronger case that the creation texts in the Bible are literal and consistent and totally without error. So come back after lunch.
I'm gonna do a little follow-up. Does biochemistry support that in a similar light?
I mean, in a sense, biochemistry is ambivalent about the age of the earth. You're dealing more with, how are these molecular systems structured, how they operate. But when you look at biology, it's very clear that life has been on Earth for 3.8, maybe 4 billion years. And in fact, one of the reasons I think people should pay attention to an old Earth perspective is the arguments that you can make for God's existence and God's intervention in life's history are extremely powerful from an old Earth perspective, because one of the things that is deeply troubling to original life researchers is that as soon as the Earth's conditions are even remotely suitable for life, life appears almost instantaneously on the Earth. And the very first life are single-celled organisms, but the more that we study what those organisms would have been like, the more we're discovering they're incredibly complex at the onset. So the sudden appearance of complex life, yet single-celled but still biochemically complex life. And there's also the recognition now that it wasn't just a single-cell type, but there was a vast ecosystem of single-celled organisms that were all distinct. There was a fully formed ecosystem that emerges almost instantaneously. That, to me, looks like a signature for a creator. And from a young Earth perspective, you literally are throwing away that incredible evidence. So,
yeah, what Fuzz is saying is from an old Earth perspective, the testimony is instantaneous creation events, spread over time, but the events are instantaneous. You lose that argument from a young Earth perspective. And just driving through West Virginia these past few days, I noticed there's limestone everywhere. And it's not just West Virginia. A big chunk of the eastern U.S. is limestone. There's huge amounts of it. And where does that limestone come from? Life that predated us human beings. And we need that huge quantity to be able to get the technology we need to take the good news of salvation to all the people groups of the world. So the question is, where did those 76 quadrillion tons of biodeposits come from? That's easy to answer from an old Earth perspective. You can't answer it from a young Earth perspective. But it's crucial to take the good news of salvation to all the people groups of the world.
All right, do we have any from the floor?
Got one.
There we go. Coming up here. Let's have you talking to Mike so we can get it over the live stream.
What about the idea of creation with built-in age?
Yeah, that's often proposed. What about God creating with the appearance of age? Now, as an astronomer, I look out at the universe and I can see stars that are brand new, just literally formed hours ago. So we see stuff that's brand new. We see stuff that measures to be hundreds of years old, thousands of years old, millions of years old, billions of years old, all the way back to 13.5 billion years old and everything in between. If the universe really is young, why do we see this appearance of ages that span a spectrum from 0 to 13.5 billion? And it tells us 8 times in the Bible it's impossible for God to lie or deceive. And so that would be a deceptive God in that case. Now, sometimes the argument is made, well, Didn't God create Adam with the appearance of age? Only if you'd assume that Adam came from the womb of a woman would his height and capability be evidence of age. It tells us he was created from the dust of the earth. And God wanted to be able to communicate with Adam really quickly. That wouldn't be possible if his brain was only a third of the size of an adult brain. So he created him full size. But he was full sized and brand new. There was no appearance of age in the bodies of Adam and Eve. That would only be the case if they came from the womb of a woman.
All right. So you said that we are all descendants from one man and one woman. So from where did Cain's wife come?
Where did Cain's wife come from? That is actually addressed in our book, Navigating Genesis, where we basically point out that Adam and Eve had Cain, Abel, and Seth. But if you look at Genesis 4 and 5, it tells us that they had many other sons and daughters besides. And Adam lived to be 930. Let's just assume that Adam and Eve were fertile for just 2/3 of their lifespan and that they were doing everything they could to stop the birth of children. That would be the rhythm method without the benefit of thermometers, which means they'd be having a child probably at least every 2 years, at best every 4 years. But that means you're looking at about 120 to 150 children per couple. And so we show you in Navigating Genesis is how rapidly the human population would develop, given what we see in those early chapters of Genesis, and basically point out by the time Adam is 760 years old, you've got more people on the face of the earth than you have today. And so when God told Adam, multiply and fill the earth, he could have done it in his lifespan. And so Cain would only have to wait a few decades before there would be plenty of women he could choose from for a wife. Now, that does imply that somebody had to marry their sister. But what we notice in the book of Genesis, there's no prohibition against brother-sister marriages. We have the outstanding example of Abraham being married to his half-sister. It's only in Exodus where we have a prohibition. And Fuzz is a biochemist. He can tell you that, hey, if you're taking a male and a female that have distinct DNA, it takes many generations before you run the risk of propagating a genetic defect, which explains why no prohibition in Genesis, but you get a prohibition in the book of Exodus. On the other hand, I want to be clear about this. The scenario I gave you doesn't really play out. There wouldn't have been 17 billion people on the face of the earth by the time Adam was 760. Why? Because of what you see in Genesis chapter 4. Murder was out of control. We know that because after the flood, notice how God speaks sharply to Noah, you've got to restrain this expression of murder. And so to explain why the population level had to be as low as what the scientific evidence tells us it must have been in the days before the flood, we calculate that in the days before the flood, about 95% plus of human beings had their lives being terminated by being murdered by their fellow man. And so maybe Cain had to wait a few more years, but hey, it tells us it wasn't until generations after Cain that murder really got to that degree out of control. Now, I just finished writing a book on Noah's flood. It'll be out in about another year. But I basically made the argument the flood was an expression of mercy to save humanity from self-extermination. We were in danger of driving ourselves to extermination. The flood rescued us from self-extermination.
All right, do we have any more from the floor?
Why did God make the world?
Why did God make the world?
Well, I'll get started while Fuzz is finishing his cough, okay? It tells us clearly in the Bible that God did not need to create. There was Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They were in a wonderful, loving relationship with one another. They didn't need to create to experience love. That's the problem with the non-Christian religions. God is forced to create in order to have the experience of love. However, it tells us that God created to expand the expression of his love. And so he created creatures with the capacity to experience and express love, so they could express love to one another, and also how he could express love to his creatures, and to manifest his glory to those creatures. This is built into the creeds, that God created as a way to express his glory and to express his love. Fuzz, take it away.
Yeah, that was an excellent response. And, one thing also I would add to that is when you ask that question, why did God create? It's endemic in his nature. He is a creator. And so it's an expression of who he is. And, we are made in his image, which makes possible for us to enter into a relationship with God. But because we are made in God's image, we too are creators, right? And so the question would be, well, why do you create, or why do I create? There's something that's compelling us to do that, many times for no practical reason other than for the sheer joy of creating. So when we think about God as creator and we think about ourselves as creator, it really forms we have this unique fellowship with God that's expressed every time we create.
Are there any more from the floor? We have, I think, time for about one more. All right, so this one says, if the evidence points to intelligent design and major issues exist in evolutionary theory, are more scientists moving towards theism?
Well, we do see scientists coming to faith in Jesus Christ. I mean, that's one of the joys of being part of Reasons to Believe, is speak to audiences like this and see scientists coming forward and saying, hey, this is the time I gave my life to Christ, or hey, I read one of your books, and that's what brought me to faith in Jesus Christ. And, what we're trying to practice at Reasons to Believe is a top-down approach, where we basically present material capable of reaching people at the highest academic levels, and then through them reaching people at all different levels of education and learning and motivation. Many Christian organizations have a bottom-up approach. We see the need for a top-down. In fact, one of our goals is to build a community of 1,000 doctoral level scholars around the world and equip them to reach their peers for Christ. Because I think if we achieve that goal, we're going to see an amazing trickle-down effect that could really bring about another dramatic reformation. Well, not a reformation, but a breakthrough in people coming to faith in Jesus Christ. So we're partnering with the bottom-up people. We need both, bottom-up and top-down.
But, one of the things that I think is interesting among life scientists is there are some ideas that are beginning to emerge about the nature of the evolutionary process that seems to suggest that the process itself may have been jimmy-rigged to only go to certain endpoints. And this is a radical idea because the way people have understood evolution is that it's without purpose, it's without direction, there's no real endpoint specified from the get-go. So you're beginning to see ideas that are appearing in the scientific literature that suggest that there is design and purpose, potentially even in the evolutionary process, which is a radical idea. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, because it may then be essentially a non-debate as to whether or not God created through evolution or through some kind of intervention, because no matter how you slice it, you're going to wind up in the same spot, namely that there has to be a purpose and meaning and intentionality in living systems. But also something else that's remarkable to me is that in the last decade or so, I'm seeing more and more evolutionary biologists argue that for human exceptionalism. It's hard-pressed to find an anthropologist that will deny human exceptionalism. And this is the idea that human beings stand apart from all other creatures. because for most of the last 150 years, the science of human origins has been steeped in this idea that humans aren't exceptional, there's nothing special about us, we only differ in degree, not kind, from other animals, including, the great apes. And now we see more and more scientists saying, wait a minute, the data really is suggesting there's something special about us, and it's possible to connect what they think makes us exceptional with the image of God. And so even though, much of the life sciences is influenced by ideas that are really contrary to a theistic worldview, more and more scientists, based on the evidence, are moving towards a direction that suggests design and purpose, even if they still are steeped within an evolutionary framework.
All right. Let's hear it for the two of them. Thank you so much. Thank you for asking questions and using